Let's talk about promises. We make them all the time, right? For a day, maybe a year, sometimes a lifetime. But what about a promise that takes a full 100 years to keep? Today, we're diving into an incredible story about a community, a really tough journey, and a pledge that spans a century.
It's a heck of a question, isn't it? And you know, it's not just about the time. It's really about what a community is willing to go through, what they're willing to carry on their shoulders, and what they are determined to pass on to their kids and their kids' kids.
So our story really comes to a head in 2022. I want you to just picture this. All across the valleys of Chihuahua and the forests of Durango in northern Mexico, church bells are just ringing out, not for a warning, not out of sadness, but for a massive celebration.
100. That's the number at the very heart of all this joy. It marks 100 years since a group of Mennonite families packed their entire lives into wagons, left their homes behind in Canada, and headed south, all in search of something they valued more than anything else.
And for this centennial, you better believe their descendants came from everywhere. I mean, from the colonies right there in Mexico, from big cities where they're now a huge part of the community, and from all over the world, places like Texas, Alberta, even as far away as Paraguay. It was this huge, incredible homecoming. You would have seen this message everywhere, on banners all over the place, and it tells you everything. This wasn't just about marking a date on a calendar for them. No, this was a celebration of a century of faith, a belief that they'd been guided the whole way. That idea is the bedrock of this entire story.
So to really get why this celebration was such a big deal, we have to go back to that journey. I mean, why would thousands of people just up and leave their farms, their whole lives in Canada, for a totally uncertain future in the Mexican desert? Well, it all boiled down to one thing: a search for freedom.
And look, we're not talking about some abstract concept of freedom here. No, for them, it was about very real, very specific things. The freedom to build their own towns, the freedom to choose what their own kids learned in school, the freedom to pray the way they wanted to, and really, the freedom to decide for themselves who they were.
Okay, let's jump back to the celebration. Right there, sitting in the front row, were the elders. These are the men and women who are the last living link to that original journey. They heard the stories firsthand from their parents and grandparents. They are the keepers of the flame, the living memory of it all. One of them, a man in his 90s, gets up and starts to read from this incredibly fragile yellowed letter. It was written by the very first people who arrived. And just listen to these words. Even when things were so incredibly hard, their first thought was to write about being free and to give thanks.
And here's what's so amazing. They wrote that hopeful letter when they had literally nothing. No real roof over their heads, no crops in the field, and absolutely no guarantee that they would even make it. All they had was their faith.
After the letter was read, the entire crowd, the whole place, got to its feet. And the applause wasn't this loud, roaring thing. It was described as starting soft and then building and building until it sounded just like falling rain. It was this powerful, collective moment of remembering a century of sacrifice.
Now let's zoom in from the huge crowd to a really quiet, intimate moment that I think gets to the absolute heart of what this is all about. It's a simple conversation between a mother and her young daughter that just boils down this 100-year legacy perfectly.
The little girl, hearing about her ancestors traveling for so long in wagons, just looks up at her mom and asks the simplest, but also the most profound question there is. Why? Why would they do that? Why leave everything you know for a path that was so hard?
And her mother's answer is just so powerful. It really captures the entire spirit of the community. It wasn't about what they hoped to gain in terms of stuff, but what they were desperate not to lose in their spirit.
But, you know, kids, that's not quite enough. She presses on. It's not enough to know it was for something. She needs to know what that something was. What on earth could be worth losing everything for? And then her mother kneels down, looks her in the eye, and gives her the answer that explains everything. The whole journey, all the hardship, the 100 years of holding on, it was all to protect the one thing they felt truly mattered, their soul. So as the celebration started to wrap up, the focus began to shift. It moved from looking back at the past to looking forward to the future. The community leaders, the bishops, they stood up in front of everyone, not just to remember the old promise, but to make a new one for the next 100 years. And their new pledge wasn't complicated at all. It was just a way of saying, we're going to keep doing this. It was a reaffirmation of their deepest values, boiled right down to these three simple ideas.
It's a promise to carry that same spirit forward, not as a piece of history, but as a guide for how to live right now. And they were real about it. They acknowledged that following this path would mean making hard choices every single day, just like it did for their ancestors, choosing humility over pride, choosing the faithful path even when it's harder than the easy one, and keeping their faith at the center of it all.
So what do we take away from all this? The Centennial wasn't the end of the story. It was more like a mile marker on a journey that's still going. 100 years later, they see themselves as a people who are still moving, still defined by that same faith and that same search for freedom that started everything. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? What promises are we making today for the next 100 years?